Coders, let's make an animation. I have created a spin-off and I'm calling it Animation Sandbox. Sandbox is a name you use when you're just messing around, and that's what we want to do here. We just want to make a simple animation and play around with it till we understand it. So let's just start by drawing a circle. So ellipse, and we'll put the X, we'll put it in the center of the screen. So that's X 200 and Y 200, and we'll make it 50 pixels wide by 50 pixels tall. So it's a perfect circle, and then semicolon, and we've got our circle. And let's give it a little color. So before our ellipse command, let's change the fill color. So we'll just take fill parentheses, and our color picker pops up, and let's just take red, and that's great. And so now we've got a red circle in the middle of the screen. And to animate it, we need this draw function. So we're using a form of JavaScript called processing.js, and that has a built-in draw function where I just type draw equals, and it filled in function, parentheses, open curly bracket, closing curly bracket, and semicolon. So now everything inside this draw function is going to be redrawn 60 times per second. So by inside the function, I mean between this curly bracket here and this curly bracket here. So if I just bring my circle and my fill color, Command X, and then Command V to put it inside the draw function, and I indent it nicely so it's easier to read. Now what's actually happening right now is my program is running and it's redrawing that circle 60 times each second. It doesn't look like it's doing anything because the circle's not moving. So let's create an animation to move the circle. So what do we want to do? Let's just have the circle move up. So we actually want to just change its Y position. So I'm going to create a variable for the Y position. I'll call it var ypos, and we'll set it equal to 200, which is the initial Y position of our circle. Okay, now let's make the circle move. So inside our draw function, we want to change the Y position of the circle each time we draw the circle. So instead of so in the ellipse command, this is the X position and this is the Y position. Then this is width and height. We want to change the Y position each time we draw the circle. So instead of using 200 each time, we want to use a variable so it can change, so it can vary. So we'll use that Y pause variable. Okay, now, still you can see, even if we restart, the circle's not moving because it's still, Y position is not changing. We set it to 200 here, and then we use the variable name here, but the value of the Y pause variable is still always 200, so the circle's not moving. Last thing, let's change the Y position variable each time before we draw the circle. So we'll say Y pause gets whatever Y pause is, the value of Y pause, plus 2. Okay. Now when we restart, you'll see that the circle is moving down the screen. Okay, actually I wanted it to move up. So let's, instead of adding to the Y pause each time, let's subtract from the Y pause. So we'll restart, and now you see the circle moving up. Okay, so let's think about what's happening. So we set the Y position to be 200. Then inside the draw function, we are subtracting 2 from 200. So that makes it 198. So then we set the fill color to red, and then we draw the circle. And we draw it at 200x, and we draw it at the Y position, which is now 198, because we subtracted 2 from 200. So the first time it draws the circle, it's drawing it at Y position 198. Then, since this function is a loop, it loops back through this function, and it does this 60 times a second. It comes back to the top. Y position is 198. And then we say Y position gets 198 minus 2. So now Y position is 196. So when we come down here and draw our red circle, we're now drawing it at X 200, Y 196. And Y 196 is slightly higher up on the screen than 198, so it's drawing a new circle. And then it loops back again, and it draws it at Y position 194, and then 192, and then 190, and eventually it draws it at Y position 0, and it keeps going off the screen. Now it's way up there, drawing it at Y position negative 300 or something. It's still drawing it. It's just way up off the screen. Okay, so that's how the draw function works. Now let's play around with it so we can get more comfortable with it. And one other variable we can do is we can, by default, the draw function draws the scene 60 times per second. We can use the frameRate command with a capital R, and we can change that frame rate. So if I do this, now it's only drawing the scene 10 times a second, and you'll see the circle moves much, much slower. Right? So it's now just doing this 10 times a second rather than 60 times a second. We could really make it obvious to us what's happening if we change the frame rate to 1. So it's going to redraw it once every second. And that makes it really move really slowly. You can kind of see easier now. It's just redrawing a circle once a second, 2 pixels higher up on the screen, because we're subtracting 2 from the Y position every time before we draw the circle. Okay? So if we increase this, let's subtract, instead of subtracting 2, let's subtract 10, just to make it more obvious what's happening. So we draw the circle, subtract 10, draw the circle again, and so now the circle's being drawn 10 pixels higher on the screen each time through the draw function, and this draw function is happening once a second because we set the frame rate to 1. So I encourage you to just play around with this and see what the animation does. One more thing that we've talked about and that we should do is to really have an animation effect. So right now it's drawing the circle and drawing the circle, and it's continuing to show all the previously drawn circles. We can use this little trick to kind of erase the previously drawn circles. So what if every time through the draw function we call the background command, and we set the background to, let's make it, let's make it white. So 255, 255. So we're kind of erasing the whiteboard every time before we draw the circle. So now we draw the circle, and before we redraw it, we make the background white. So that kind of wipes out the circle we've drawn. So now we're seeing 1 circle on the screen. And if we speed it up, it's a much more powerful illusion. It makes it really look like the circle's moving. So if we put the frame rate back to 60, if we draw it 60 times a second, it looks like the circle's flying up the screen. Let's slow it down a little bit by making our Y position change back to 2 every time. So when we hit restart now, the circle appears to be floating up the screen. We know if we kind of comment out this background command, let's comment this and this. If we comment out that background command and just turn that off, then we're back to our original animation. And we can see the circles being drawn multiple times. But when we draw the background on top of the circle, it really creates a powerful illusion that the circle itself is moving, even though it's really just being redrawn in a different place each time. Okay, so I would mess around with this. Play around with it till it makes total sense to you. Come in here and let's change the Y position. So let's say not the Y position, the X position. The X position, let's start it at 200. And instead of just changing the Y position, let's change the X position each time. And instead of subtracting from the X position each time, let's add to the X position each time. So take a guess. What do you think that's going to do? Did nothing. Why did it do nothing? Because our X position, even though we changed this variable, we didn't actually use the X position when we draw the circle. So we're drawing the circle at X equals 200 each time. So instead of drawing at X equals 200, let's draw it at X pos. And we know, because what we did here, we know that X pos is changing each time. So now the circle's going to appear to move. And so that change in X position is making it look like it's go this way. Okay. Mess around with this for a good amount of time until you can make that circle go any which way you want, until you really understand what's going on with the animation. Okay, have fun with that.